The Black Plague struck the gilded city of Constantinople in 1347, and by 1348 the Black Plague spread to the rest of Europe. Retired Byzantine Emperor John Cantacazinos describes the scene. No physician's art was sufficient, neither did the disease take the same course in all persons, but the others, unable to resist, died the same day, a few within a few hours. Those who could resist for 2 or 3 days had a very violent fever at first, the disease in such cases attacking the head. Whenever people felt sick, there was no hope left for recovery, but by turning to despair, adding to their prostration, and severely aggravating their sickness, they died at once. The Black Plague was thought to have spread to Europe from the east, possibly originating from Mongol troops stationed on the Burma-Yunnan border. The swift and decisive conquest of Eurasia by Mongol troops allowed for the global transmission of diseases, as troops and animals moved from destination to destination, cities to cities, carrying with them localized diseases. It can be said that the Black Plague was one of the first truly global epidemics, made possible by the unification of Eurasia by the great Mongol hordes. It's been reported that the Khan of the Golden Horde, Genibeg, who have witnessed the outbreak of the plague amongst his own people, would lob plague-infected corpses into Kaffa, a city he was sieging in 1347. Genoese vessels caught the virus during the siege of Kaffa, and spread the disease to the rest of Europe as the Genoese vessels traveled to the various ports in the Mediterranean. Regardless of how the Black Plague originated and spread, the devastation it caused in both Europe and the neighboring Islamic world is undeniable. Experts estimate that the plague killed 25 million out of the total population of 80 million in Europe during the period 1348 to 1351. England and Wales were hit particularly hard, with almost 1/2 of its population lost to the plague. Italy has been estimated to have lost about 1/3 of its population. The Islamic world was not spared by the Black Plague, as one contemporary Muslim writer wrote, "Civilization both in the east and in the west was visited by the destructive plague, which devastated nations and caused populations to vanish. The entire inhabited world changed." Reliable estimates for the Middle East are hard to come by, but mortality in Egypt or Syria is commonly put at a comparable level to Europe. While the plague, by any measurement, was a horrific event, there was some upsides for the lower stratosphere of society. The rapid decline of human lives during the plague made human labor much more scarce. The Black Plague was devastating to the human population, but had no effects on the land or physical infrastructures. With less human labor around, landowning nobility faced the question of who would work their lands. Faced with the possibility of a painful death, laborers from the bottom rung of society were less inclined to work for a pittance and demanded lower rents and higher wages in order to be enticed to work, one contemporary writer reported. Such a shortage of laborers ensued that the humble turned up their nose at employment and could scarcely be persuaded to serve the imminent for triple wages. The situation was similar in the Islamic world, as one historian noted. Artisans, wage workers, porters, servants, grooms, weavers, laborers, and their like, their wages multiplied many times over. However, not many remained, since most of them died. A worker of this type is not found except after strenuous searching. Landowners and nobility across England had to compete with each other to convince the remaining laborers to remain, or to poach laborers from each other. English workers demanded and received meat pies and ale as part of their compensation. Rents too had to be lowered to entice the few remaining tenants to stay. Income from renters declined by 20 to 30% in the first half of the 14th century in England. As a result of lower rents and increased wages, many noble families throughout Europe were struggling financially. Belted knights declined from around 3,000 to 2,400 by 1400 and 1,300 by 1500. However, noblemen across Europe didn't sit idly by as their fortunes shrank. They quickly rallied the local government to take action to protect the pre-plague status quo, especially when it came to wages. In 1349 England, the Crown passed the Ordinance of Labourers. Since a great part of the population, and especially workers and employees, servants, has now died in this pestilence, many people, observing the needs of the masters and the shortage of employees, are refusing to work unless they're paid an excessive salary. We have ordained that every man or woman in our realm of England, whether free or unfree, shall, if offered employment consonant with their status, be obliged to accept the employment offered, and they should be paid only the fees, liveries, payments, or salaries which are usually paid in the part of the country where they are working in the 20th year of our reign, 1346, or in some other appropriate year 5 or 6 years ago. No one should pay or promise wages, liveries, payments, or salaries greater than those defined above, under pain of paying twice whatever he paid or promised to anyone who feels himself harmed by it. However, the threat of legal liabilities paled in comparison to the threat of non-existence presented by the Black Plague, and the ordinance was routinely ignored, as one English nobleman noted. The workers were so above themselves and so bloody-minded that they took no notice of the king's command. If anybody wished to hire them, he had to submit to their demands, for either his fruit and standing corn would be lost, or he had to be pandered to the arrogance and greed of the workers. France attempted similar wage-limiting legislation, but was equally met with failure. Other European nations, in particular Eastern European nations, Poland, Prussia, Hungary, resorted to coercion and threat of physical violence in order to restore the pre-plague status quo. The nobilities in these countries increased the labor obligations of laborers with labor dues, cash payments, and the restrictions of freedom of movement. Prussia, Bohemia, Russia, Lithuania, and Poland prohibited tenants from leaving without permission or without paying a large fee, or all arrears, or except at certain times, or in some cases at all. Some of these countries also forbade other noblemen from poaching tenants from each other. Tenant debts and other obligations were used to keep tenants tied to the land. For the laborers in Western Europe and certain parts of the Islamic world, who benefited from the increase in real wages and living conditions as a result of a scarcity in labor due to the plague, they enjoyed luxuries that they previously lacked, such as increased meat consumption. Wealthier peasant laborers increased their meat consumption along with the number of calories consumed. An average citizen of Cairo might consume 1,154 calories per day, including 45.6 grams of protein and 20 grams of fat during the pre-plague early 14th century. But by the 15th century, the average citizen of Cairo ate a more generous 1,930 calories, including 82 grams of protein and 45 grams of fat. Increased wealth of the laborers resulted in inflation, as one contemporary noted. In spite of there being plenty of everything, it was all twice as expensive: household equipment and foodstuff, as well as merchandise, hired labor, farm workers, and servants. The only exception was property and houses, of which there is a glut to this day. Real wages peaked in the early to mid-15th century in many European cities. However, real wages began to slide from about 1500 onwards, as Europe and the rest of the world began to recover from the horrors of the plague. Experts estimated Europe's population grew from 60 million in 1400 to 81 million in 1500, with England's population growing as much as 50% during the 15th century. Rapidly increasing population reduced the scarcity of human labor, thus resulting in a slide in real wages. However, laborers in London, Amsterdam, and Antwerp were able to maintain their real wage gains throughout the early modern era. In Western Europe, the scarcity of labor due to the plague was enough of a shock to overthrow the notion of medieval serfdom, as laborers demanded mobility in employment and better tenement agreements that eventually only required the payment of rent and did away with labor services. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this short trip in economic history. Please consider liking and subscribing to the Strange World of Econ channel. It's a great free way to support the channel so I can bring you even more great content. Till next time.